Compared to nearby Coventry, Leamington Spa emerged from World War II relatively unscathed. But change was coming. As the town celebrated peace, a new world order, and Britain's need to rebuild its economy would lead to an influx of new arrivals to the town. Here are some of their stories. Among the first to arrive were members of the Polish Western Army. These soldiers and their dependents faced persecution if they returned to Poland. Instead, they remained in Italy, under the protection of their commander, General Władysław Anders. Eventually, they were invited to resettle in the UK.
People were then moved into former British Army camps, former American hospitals, in a few cases former Italian prisoner of war camps, I think, but the security and the wire had gone.
Many of the Poles who came to Leamington ended up in the former War Agricultural Committee camp in Great Head Road before dispersing around the town. They remained a close-knit community, suspicious of British authorities who had originally tried to send them back to Poland. Most turned down the opportunity of British citizenship.
Everyone thought, well, keep my options open. With the UN travel document, I can basically go and work anywhere in the world. And I may wish to do so, and of course a lot of people did precisely that.
Political activism was an important part of Polish culture, and the Leamington Association was heavily involved in the Polish government in exile, which stood in opposition to the communist regime.
I remember I was 4 sitting at the dinner table in my high chair, and my father and my grandfather arguing politics and turning on me and saying, well, what do you think? And I didn't really have much of an opinion at the time, but I was supposed to, and it was expected that everyone has an opinion. Because if you don't have an opinion, well, you're just a slave.
By the turn of the 1950s, the town had 3 major employers. Flavels, who had been around since Victorian times and now specialised in gas cookers and fires. Ford, who had taken over the former Flavels Iron Foundry on Warwick New Road and used it to produce agricultural equipment. And AP, Automotive Products, often referred to as Lockheed, after the brakes produced under licence there.
In 1931, they started building a big factory on Tatchbrook Road, and at one time, soon after the war, 80% of British cars had a Borg and Beck clutch made in Leamington, and 50% of them had Lockheed brakes made in Leamington. Lockheed claimed to have made over 2 million parts for aircraft in the war, and Flavels rather more humbly made ammunition boxes. It all went back to normal, but as the amount of goods being produced increased, the factories couldn't find the people to do the work.
After the war, there were deliberate attempts to recruit workers into the United Kingdom. There were European voluntary workers who were recruited from parts of Eastern and Southern Europe, and many refugees too were invited or encouraged to come to the country. There was also the 1948 British Nationality Act, and this gave the right to work and the right to reside in the UK for people from Ireland.
Leamington companies ran recruitment ads in the Irish newspapers, and the town soon became a magnet for Irish workers and their families looking to build a better life. Many of these early arrivals still meet up today at the town's Irish club, St Patrick's.
I worked in a sweet factory, and the factory closed down, unfortunately, and my husband, Vincent, came over here because he couldn't get work in Ireland either.
I got a job in Flavels. They had little funnels for the back of the fire, and I used to weld them. So I was a little bit of a welder, you'd call it, which was very, very good for a woman, if you understand me, them days.
Finished school at 16, went into AP, Lockheed as it was then, and I worked there till I retired at 65.
The reason I stayed was because I liked the place, and the money was very, very attractive. Absolutely big time, compared to £2, £1.17 in 6 in Ireland. And I was getting £7 in England, over £7. And I used to send my mum money home and pay my auntie, and I still have money to buy clothes and do everything and what have you.
There were plenty of jobs and the pay was good, but the work was tough. Morty O'Dowd originally came over to work in the building trade, but injuries meant that he ended up applying for work in the furnaces at Ford.
The interview was quite simple, actually. You had to have a chest X-ray, and they showed you a danger sign, and you had to tell them what it was, and that was it, and you were in. June 1970, and it was like really hot. Oh my God! And the temperatures, the foundry, you see, it's so warm. I thought I'd die with the heat. Then the winter come, and you were lovely and warm.
The first Indian workers came over in the early 1950s. By the time Balraj Singh Desi arrived in January 1962, there was already a well-established support network to help new arrivals settle into the town.
The system was, any newcomer who came to this country, he had a link where to come to. And whichever house a friend he went to, it was a common practice that he will get free food and accommodation until he finds a job. And finding a job was not that difficult, especially in Leamington. It was prosperous at the time.
These jobs didn't necessarily reflect the skills or education of those taking them on, and Asian workers often faced discrimination when it came to promotion.
When I came over, there were a lot of Indian, Asian people and Irish people, they used to work, but they were on shop floor.
Common complaint I used to hear was that they don't give us the opportunity to move into semi-skilled jobs or training for skilled jobs. I had discussions with quite a number of employers. They said, we have no problem. It's the resistance from the unions.
Somebody from here advised, you forget about whatever you used to be, whatever it is, whatever the job you've been given, take over. When you take over the job, then you can show your efficiency and go up.
People like me understood that it will take time for any new community to make inroads.
At last, I managed to get the job in automatic product as a very junior clerk. I was the first Asian to get the job in white collar. It was a little bit difficult in the beginning, but I had a good nature, let it go. I just managed to finish 25 years. I retired in 1993.
The Caribbean was also targeted by British recruiters, and difficult conditions at home made the trip to Britain an attractive option.
In 1950, there was a terrible hurricane in the Caribbean, Hurricane Charlie. Caused massive devastation. The banana crops, all kinds of crops were affected. People were more than desperate.
British passport holders like Gershom Brown were determined to better themselves and improve their families' prospects in a land they had only really read about at school.
They had had a colonial education. So England had sold itself and communicated its mythology and its greatness and its grandeur and its opportunities through their educational system. So they knew the Wordsworth, I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high, or vale and hill, when all at once I saw a cloud, a host of golden daffodils. Daffodils, to my knowledge, don't grow in Jamaica, but they knew all about daffodils.
The reality of life in England was not what they were expecting.
Nobody wanted them. They saw the signs. No blacks, no dogs, no Irish. And how did this work itself out in terms of finding a place here in Leamington? Only Asian families allowed them to rent a room or rent a flat. My first memory of living here in Leamington was in a flat on Clarendon Avenue. So we lived on the first floor, and on the ground floor was an Asian family.
In the 1950s, Leamington was thriving. The population grew steadily from 32,000 at the end of the war to around 45,000 by 1960. New estates, like those in Leamington and Whitnash, were built to house the expanding population. But the town centre was largely unchanged from before the war.
The old names still carried on, of course. Burgess of Colborne, Woodwards, Francis's in Bath Street. They were all still thriving after the war and for quite a long time afterwards.
The lights of Leamington were a new attraction, and took place in Jefferson Gardens every year from 1951 to 1961.
This garden was filled with the kaleidoscopes of colours. The trees were lit up, and there were lots of magical installations based on fairy tales and animal characters and illuminated skylines. Thousands of people came to this show from all over the Midlands. It had a fantastic reputation. I think about 300,000 people came, and there were 20,000 alone on one Saturday.
In the early 1960s, a new community started to arrive, the Ahmadiyya Muslims.
One of the first was Abdul Ghaffur, who came from Pakistan in 1960.
You know, where do you live? Where do you settle? Who shows you the ropes? Who shows you what to do? You know, it's not like nowadays where you've got Google, you know, it'll tell you everything. And it was actually a Sikh family that very much helped him get his feet on the ground and settled.
Abdul found work at the Potterton's boiler factory. He was quickly promoted to supervisor and elected as a union official.
So becoming a union representative, I think, reflected his inclination to help people. But I think wider than that, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community has always encouraged that. Islam encourages that, you know, Islam teaches that loyalty to the nation is part of faith. So I think in a way, anyone who would have come here, they would have integrated themselves. But I think it always helps that someone is there who's established because the first steps are always the hardest.
For every community, having a place to meet was very important.
The friendships forged under fire when you rely on your military comrades for your survival run much deeper than anything that you can encounter in civilian life. So it's hardly surprising that these people stayed together and wanted to socialise together.
People from all over the Caribbean came to our house. People from Montserrat, people from Trinidad, people from Barbados.
In the early 1960s, 2 Irish clubs were formed. One in Holly Walk and the other, St. Patrick's, in a building by the river, affectionately known as the Hoot. This was replaced in 1994 by a purpose-built club, the first in England to sell Guinness on draft.
We had darts, we played cards, played pool. There's lots of things we could do in this club here.
There was somebody who taught Irish dancing that he carried on for years. You'd have danced there, then your children would have danced there.
Well, good atmosphere here. If different people throughout Ireland.
We had a club in Hollywalk as well, and we used to go there every Sunday night, but fortunately that closed down. So I started coming here, which I made more friends, and I wouldn't give her up for the world.
In 1964, Srinath Rohilla launched the Commonwealth Club in a large house opposite the parish church. This was designed as a meeting place, not just for the Indian community, but for the whole town.
Communities who came were the mostly majority in Indians, West Indians, and the Irish community, and some English people. People felt at home, comfortable.
In 1968, Leamington's Polish community acquired the historic former town hall and police station on High Street.
When this organisation formed in 1961, there was nothing. And almost certainly there would have been nothing were it not for the fact that Monsignor Golomb, who was the parish priest that said Mass in Polish in Leamington, was a former inmate of Nazi concentration camps. These survivors brought a class action suit against the West German government and won. And the Monsignor decided to use that money to loan it to the committee we had here to purchase a centre.
The centre had a chapel and was used for teaching Polish language and dancing. Visitors could enjoy authentic Polish food, music, and drama.
Theatre was a big part, I remember, mainly because I think General Anders was such a fan of the theatre. If you put on a theatrical performance, there's a chance the General might come, you know.
The first Sikh temple was established in New Street in 1967, and the growing Ahmadiyya Muslim community also needed a place to meet and pray.
we spotted what was the Warwickshire Clubs for Young People, a building that they were selling. And that's located in Clubland, which is by the riverside. And that really was a new chapter in the Ahmadiyya Muslim community's progress in Leamington.
Discrimination continued to be an issue in the 1960s, and newcomers to the town were sometimes subjected to more overt acts of racial aggression.
On the way to school, young people would shout hurtful and horrible words to us. You don't have to know what a word means to know that it is meant to be hurtful and malicious.
At the night and the darkness, they used to write on the bridge, railway bridges, Indians go home and that kind of thing. Nasty slogans. They also started to break glass windows of the Indian shops.
Leamington became the focus for the activities of a small group of far-right extremists.
A resident of Leamington called Dharam Singh was nominated for the Labour seat in a municipal election. There was a burning cross put outside the front door of Dharam Singh's house in Avenue Road. So, a real visceral, I think, sort of act of race hate.
In response, minority communities and the local authorities began to work together to try and combat racism through groups like the Interracial Committee, the Police Forum, and the Community Relations Council.
There was an effort in the community. White people of conscience, black people under my father's leadership, Asians coming together to look this thing straight in the face, to say, what are we going to do? And the only way it's going to be better is if we come together.
In 1971, race equality think tank the Runnymede Trust praised Leamington as a positive example of racial integration.
They praise the Sikh immigrants from the Punjab region of India, which is who they particularly focus on, as being very industrious and law-abiding and able to manage their own affairs and making efforts to integrate. These were all things that were sort of seen as praiseworthy. So along with Leamington's sort of relatively buoyant economy, and also they note the efforts of the town council actually to push back quite forcefully against some of the requests, for example, that they deny loans to people from certain countries for houses. These sort of three things combined, they say, made Leamington rather a better prospect.
After the British African colony of Uganda declared independence in 1962, members of the minority Asian community, like Chandrakant Dave, decided to move to the UK.
I retired from the civil service in Uganda in 1968, and in 1969 I came to Leamington Spa. Children used to come and say, "Oh, where are you coming from?" I say, "Oh, from Africa." Why your hair are not curvy? And have you seen the Tarzan? And very luckily, those friends, after so many years, they are still friends with my son.
When Ugandan Army General Idi Amin seized power in 1971, he ordered the immediate expulsion of the remaining Asians. 28,000 refugees flew to Britain in 1972 and were housed temporarily in RAF camps, including 830 in nearby Gaydon.
When the Ugandan Asian came, the council has appointed me and one of the residence council chief, a welfare officer from Gaydon camp, We started in 1973 for Warwickshire Brahm Samaj. So we can help the local people to help them.
A notorious figure in Leamington during the 60s and 70s was Robert Relf.
He was somebody who was suspected of being involved in the lodging of the burning cross outside Dharam Singh's home. If we fast forward to the 1970s, Relf rears up again, and his most infamous act was to put a for sale sign outside his house that said for sale to an English family only. And this was, thinly veiled code for a white family. Relf was in fact found in breach of the Race Relations Act, and he served time in jail He went on hunger strike and became something of a cause célèbre among the media and people on the far right who were sympathetic to his plight. It was a reminder really that the racism that was initially encountered in the 50s and 60s hadn't gone away actually.
But by now, the views of Ralph and his supporters met with much more widespread opposition across the community. One prominent group was the Leamington Anti-Racist, Anti-Fascist Committee.
They published pamphlets and they gave quotes to the media and they organised rallies. So they were very much, I think, trying to sort of build a kind of grassroots opposition, in particular to the kind of activities that were associated with Robert Ralph.
The establishment of Warwick University in 1965 meant that Leamington now also had a sizable and politically active student community.
When you look at the old copies of the student newspaper, The Boar, they're really suffused with anti-racist messaging.
And Rock Against Racism staged a series of concerts in Leamington, with performers including Coventry band The Specials.
They would do these concerts and bring together a fan base to unite against racism, but also I think to celebrate what could be achieved when they kind of learn from each other and, soaked up each other's sort of cultural influences and produced some fantastic music.
From early on, it became clear that individuals from minority communities had a broader role to play in helping the town.
I think with Abdul, what comes across is that he very quickly became an active member of the community. He was involved in volunteering for the homeless, for other charitable activities. You see that not just in Abdul, but you see that in many others immigrants that have come here.
People used to come and tell me their problems, and I used to learn about them because it was all new to me as well. Learn about them, find the solution and help them.
I work in a lot of charity work, Sikh Community Center. I used to organize the elderly people's Citizen Advisor Bureau. I used to give a little bit services. So in that way, I contributed something.
A few years after Abdul, Muhammad Salim became the local president of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Association. And Muhammad Salim also, he was one of the first Muslim JPs.
In the early 1980s, members of the Asian community finally made the breakthrough into local politics. And in 1987, Balraj Desi became the town's first Asian mayor.
It's a great responsibility. Because if I fail in this, I'll be failing the whole community. Not only the Indian community, even the whole community. Humbling, yes. That you have a man from India, ordinary person from India, coming to the town, being accepted, and then being recognized. So much more I want.
1988 was a landmark year for Leamington, the 150th anniversary of Queen Victoria granting the town its royal charter.
I noticed a plaque on the wall, which was a royal charter. And it clicked to me that it's 150 years. What an opportunity to celebrate it. So Queen first came to open the royal shopping center. And then she walked down from there to the Regent Hotel to sign the business book. And from there she came to the town hall, and then she came onto the balcony with me and my wife and the chairman of the district council and his wife. And she was charming. Everybody was very enthusiastic. People got united, people got behind it, and they enjoyed it.
Balraj's success paved the way for others. Balvinder Gill became the town's second Asian mayor in 1998, followed by Mota Singh in 2004. And Yvonne Moore became the first black mayor in 2012. Others got involved at all levels of local government.
I've been elected by the local council, a witness council, because I don't believe in joining any group, Labour or Tory or anything. So I was a councillor in a red local one. So even now, I don't join any because then you have to say yes or no, sir.
But not everyone who came to Leamington stayed. Many of the town's Caribbean community, including Gershom Brown and his family, returned home.
They all wanted to go back. Nobody came here to stay. They said to themselves, you know what, we're going to stay here for about 5 years, we'll make some money, build a house, and go back. They saw themselves as pioneers, and the whole idea of building your nation appealed to them very strongly, and he saw himself as a people builder and as a nation builder, and that fueled everything that he did.
Factories like the Ford Foundry and AP, which played such an important role in attracting people to the area, closed down years ago. But their legacy is a diverse town where communities have their own identity, but also share values and support each other.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community Centre was donated to the NHS as a vaccination centre, with 20,000 doses of vaccine being given there. More recently, the Polish Centre has led the town's efforts to support the people of Ukraine, sending 12 ambulances and over 200 tons of supplies.
In both cases, volunteers of all faiths from across the community worked together to make these things possible. Many cultures, one town.